When 10-year-old Daniel was laid to rest beneath a willow tree, no one expected his dog would lie beside the grave for days, then weeks, then years. People tried to move her. She refused. Rain, snow, or sun, Ember never left. What was she waiting for? This is the story of a bond so strong it defied death itself. The town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Tucked between rolling fields and ancient pines, it had just one gas station, one school, and one local diner that made the best blueberry pie for 3 counties. But none of those things meant much to Tyler James. Tyler was 10 years old the first time he stopped talking. Not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't. After the car accident that took his parents, Tyler became a ghost in his own home. Silent, withdrawn, and unreachable. He went to school, ate meals with his grandmother, and sat through hours of therapy. But he never spoke. Not a word. Not even when spoken to. The world, for him, was too loud with pain. That all changed on a rainy Tuesday in late October. It was during one of those silent walks home from school that Tyler first saw the dog. A mud-covered, skinny creature with fur the color of wheat and eyes like honey-glass marbles. The dog was huddled near a drainage ditch, shivering from the cold rain and trying to gnaw its way through a piece of wire mesh. Tyler stopped. The dog froze. There was a strange understanding in the way they looked at each other. 2 beings who had been bruised by the world. Slowly, Tyler stepped forward, knelt down, and reached out a trembling hand. To his surprise, the dog didn't run. Instead, it whimpered and leaned into his palm. Tyler took off his hoodie and wrapped it around the dog, whispering his first word in almost a year. Hey, no one in town claimed the dog. No one posted about a missing golden retriever. The vet guessed he was about 3 years old, healthy but malnourished. He had no collar, no chip, and no name. But Tyler gave him one. Marley, he said one morning, staring into those amber eyes. Like the ghost in the book, the one who came back. It was the first full sentence his grandmother had heard in months, and she cried behind the kitchen counter, not wanting to scare the moment away. From that day forward, Marley became more than just a pet. He was Tyler's shadow, his protector, his therapy. He would sleep at the foot of Tyler's bed, walk him to school, and wait for him outside the gates every day. Teachers reported that Tyler had started participating in class again, his voice returning like birdsong in spring. Where there had once been silence, there was now laughter, often muffled by Marley's excited barks and clumsy tail wags. Life didn't stay perfect. One winter evening, Tyler and Marley wandered into the woods behind their house. It was a well-worn path, one they'd taken a dozen times before, but this time, something felt wrong. A sharp crack, like a tree branch snapping, sent a murder of crows screeching into the sky. Marley froze, his ears perked. Tyler followed his gaze and spotted something in the distance. A man, pale jacket, hood pulled low. He wasn't moving, just standing, watching. Marley growled. Tyler felt ice crawl up his spine. They turned back, picking up speed, running until their legs burned. When they got home, Tyler tried to describe what he saw to his grandma, but the words stuck like honey in his throat. She called the police. They found footprints, but no man. Tyler didn't sleep well for weeks. To help Keepy. Tyler busy and distract him from the fear that crept into his bones, his teacher assigned him a special project, a photojournal called A Day in My Life. The goal was simple: take pictures of things that mattered. Naturally, Marley was in every shot. Marley eating pancakes, Marley digging holes, Marley cuddled up with Tyler on the couch. One photo, in particular, stood out. It was of Marley lying on his back, tongue out, while Tyler held up a sign that said, "My best friend." When the project was presented in class, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. It even made it into the local newspaper. No one expected the fire. It started in the middle of the night, a faulty wire. Within minutes, the kitchen was swallowed by flames. Tyler woke to smoke and the sound of glass shattering. His grandmother screamed from the hallway, but it was Marley who jumped onto the bed and yanked Tyler's blanket off with his teeth. Tyler coughed and stumbled through the smoke, following Marley's barks until they reached the front door. They barely made it out before the roof collapsed. The firemen arrived minutes later. Tyler's grandmother was taken to the hospital for smoke inhalation. Tyler, with Marley by his side, stood wrapped in a blanket, watching everything he owned turn to ash. But they were alive. Together. In the aftermath, the town rallied. They donated clothes, toys, and furniture. A neighbor offered them a room to stay. But something in Tyler had changed again. The old fear returned. And with it, the man in the woods. Or at least, the memory of him. Several times, Tyler thought, he saw someone following them on their walks, a flash of pale fabric, a whisper behind a tree. Marley always seemed to notice it too. Ears perked, teeth bared, but no one else ever saw him. Maybe it's just trauma, the therapist suggested. Your mind replaying old fears? Maybe. But Marley wasn't imagining it. It was supposed to be a normal Saturday. Tyler and Marley went out early for a walk along the old train tracks near Pine Hollow. Tyler had brought his camera. The air was crisp, the sky a clear blue. Marley ran ahead, tail wagging, tongue lolling. Then Tyler heard it, a scream followed by a bark. He sprinted forward, heart hammering. As he reached the bend in the tracks, he saw them. The man, the pale jacket, and Marley, standing between the man and Tyler, growling with a ferocity Tyler had never seen. The man pulled something from his pocket. Tyler screamed, but it was too late. A loud bang shattered the air. Marley collapsed. The man fled. Tyler fell to his knees beside Marley, blood staining his fur. The dog whimpered once, barely, and licked Tyler's trembling hand. Tyler screamed for help, voice raw and desperate. By the time the authorities arrived, the man was gone, but Marley was still breathing. Barely. They rushed him to the emergency vet, but the damage was too great. At 2:47 a.m., Marley died in Tyler's arms. The town mourned. The story went viral. News outlets called Marley a hero. A statue was commissioned. Tyler was offered therapy, interviews, support, but nothing filled the hole. They buried Marley at the Willow Creek Pet Cemetery, just behind the old church. Tyler visited every day, until one day. He didn't. A week after Marley's funeral, something strange happened. A woman walking her dog past the cemetery noticed a figure lying beside one of the graves. She approached slowly. It was a dog, a golden retriever. At first, she thought it was a stray, but then she saw the collar, the tags. It was Marley. But Marley was gone. Everyone knew that. She called animal control, trembling. When they arrived, they scanned the dog. No chip, not Marley, but the resemblance was uncanny. The dog refused to move. He stayed by that grave all night, and the next night, and the next. And no one could understand why. But Tyler would, because love never really dies. Frank Mallory had been the cemetery groundskeeper for 32 years. A veteran with a stiff leg and more gray in his beard. Than black, he had a reputation for being gruff and unsentimental. His daily routine was sacred. Coffee at 5:30, gate unlocked at 6, and leaf blowing by 6:15. He noticed the dog on the third day. It was raining that morning, and Frank cursed under his breath as he hauled his cart down the gravel path. That's when he saw the golden blur at the far end of the pet cemetery, curled into a tight ball by a headstone. At first, Frank assumed it was one of the neighborhood strays. He approached slowly, preparing to shoo the animal away. But when he got closer, something made him stop. The dog wasn't just lying there, he was grieving, head bowed, eyes open but distant. His body didn't flinch as Frank approached. He didn't bark, growl, or run. He simply stayed. Frank looked at the headstone. Marley, loyal friend, brave heart, forever loved by Tyler James. Frank's weathered face softened. He had read about Marley in the paper, the heroic dog who died saving his boy from a madman. The story had touched the whole town. Frank had helped dig the grave himself. But this dog wasn't Marley, was he? Word spread quickly. First among the staff at the church, then through the town's gossip vine. Have you heard? There's a ghost dog guarding the grave. Looks just like Marley. Maybe he never really died. By the end of the week, visitors began, showing up just to see the dog. A young couple brought food. A retired nurse brought blankets. A teenager tried to post a TikTok, but the dog wouldn't let anyone get close enough for a good shot. Only Frank could walk within 10 feet. He brought water bowls, dry food, and, after several silent mornings, a few warm words. You know you. Can't stay here forever, boy, Frank muttered one day, brushing leaves from a nearby headstone. The dog lifted his head but didn't move. Frank sighed. Yeah, I know. We all got our ghosts. Across town, in a small second-story apartment above the hardware store, Tyler James stared at the ceiling. The room smelled like old wood and forgotten toys. A framed photo of Marley sat on his nightstand. He hadn't touched it in days. His grandmother brought him meals. A counselor came twice a week. But Tyler didn't speak. Not anymore. Not since the funeral. His world had gone mute again. Until one evening, while scrolling absent-mindedly on his cracked tablet, a video caught his eye. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but Tyler would have known that walk anywhere. That gait, that tail flick, that soft golden fur in the wind. The caption read, "Dog refuses to leave grave of another dog. Mysterious golden retriever appears at Willow Creek Cemetery." Tyler's hand shook. He watched the video 3 times. Then he whispered, barely audible, "Marley." Frank wasn't the only one keeping watch over the grave. Late one night, as fog rolled over the hillside, a figure stood just outside the wrought iron fence. Dressed in a gray hoodie, hands deep in their pockets, the figure watched the dog from behind a veil of trees. The golden retriever didn't move, didn't bark, didn't react. But his eyes flicked toward the fence, and he growled, low, almost imperceptible. But enough for Frank, who had taken to sleeping in the old groundskeeper's shed during the nights the dog stayed over, to sit up and take notice. He peeked through the dirty window. The figure was gone, but fresh footprints trailed in the damp, earth behind the trees. The next morning, Tyler gathered every photo he had of Marley. He laid them across his bed, from puppyhood to heroism, from muddy paws to pancake breakfasts. There was one picture in particular that haunted him. Taken just a few weeks before the incident, it showed Marley staring directly at the camera. Eyes wide and ears perked. Tyler zoomed in, and for a moment he saw something strange, something impossible. A small scar beneath Marley's left eye. It wasn't big, barely noticeable, but it had been there since the rescue, from when Marley escaped the wire mesh. Tyler opened the cemetery video again, zoomed, paused. His breath caught. The same scar, same place, same dog. The town of Willow Creek began to buzz, with rumors. The local newspaper ran the story under the headline, "Ghost Dog or Miracle? Mysterious Retriever Stuns Town." Some said it was a hoax. Others believed it was Marley reincarnated. A few skeptics insisted someone had trained a look-alike to impersonate him, but there were no missing dog reports, no evidence of training, no reason for anyone to stage such a thing. Pastor Helen, who ran the church beside the cemetery, spoke out. "I believe this dog is a symbol, a reminder that love doesn't end at death's door. Maybe God sent him. Maybe it's something else. But he belongs to that boy. And for the first time in weeks, Tyler smiled. Just a little. Tyler hadn't visited the cemetery since the day they buried Marley. But now, with his grandmother beside him and a blanket tucked under one arm, he walked the old gravel path. Each step felt like moving through water. When they turned the corner, he saw him, lying beside the headstone, ears perked, eyes alert. Marley, or the dog that had Marley's eyes. The moment their eyes met, the dog stood up and barked, a single piercing note that cracked the silence like lightning. Then he ran, straight to Tyler. Tyler dropped to his knees. The dog barreled into him, tail wagging like mad, licking his face, nuzzling his chest. Tyler laughed, full-throated, pure. For the first time in months, he spoke without effort. "You came back?" His grandmother wept into her sleeve. The vet couldn't explain it. Same breed, same age, same markings. Even the scar is in the same place, she said, flipping through old files. But Marley was cremated. I saw the report myself. No chip, no collar, no answers. They ran DNA tests, but results would take weeks. In the meantime, the town called him Ghost. Ghost the grave dog. Tyler didn't care what anyone called him. To him, he was Marley. He smelled the same, acted the same, knew the same routes home. And most importantly, he still refused to leave the grave. Every night, Tyler tried to coax him home, and every night Marley would walk with him halfway, then turn back to the headstone, back to his watch. The sightings of the man in gray returned. One night, while Tyler sat beside the grave with Marley's head in his lap, he spotted movement behind the trees. He froze. Marley lifted his head and growled. Frank stepped out of the shed with a flashlight. The light caught something, eyes. Then, they vanished. Frank and Tyler searched the woods, but the man was gone. The next morning, Tyler found something strange at the foot of Marley's grave. A dog collar, burned, frayed, but unmistakably Marley's, the one he'd been buried with. In the chaos of the fire, hospital, and funeral, many of Tyler's belongings were boxed up and forgotten. But that week, his grandmother found something wedged behind an old dresser, a sealed envelope addressed in Tyler's handwriting to Marley. "If I never get to say goodbye." She handed it to him without a word. Tyler opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a note scribbled in pencil. "If something ever happens to me, don't be scared. Just wait for me. I'll come back to you somehow, I promise." Tyler stared at the note for a long time, then turned to Marley, who was watching him quietly, tail thumping once. "I guess I'm the one who made the promise," Tyler whispered. "And you kept it." That morning, something changed. Marley, or Ghost as many still called him, refused to eat. He lay not beside the grave, but directly on top of it, his head pressed to the cool stone as if listening. Frank found him there at sunrise, unmoving except for the gentle rise and fall of his chest. "You all right, buddy?" Frank asked, kneeling beside him. "What are you hearing?" The dog didn't respond. Then, without warning, he stood, walked to the cemetery gate, and stared down the road, as if waiting. Frank followed his gaze. There was nothing, just wind and early morning fog. But Marley didn't move. He watched, unblinking, waiting for something or someone, only he could sense. Back at home, Tyler flipped through the DNA test results. They were finally in. The paper confirmed what the vet already suspected. Subject, male golden retriever genetic profile, match 98.9%. Match found in archived file for Marley, deceased 3 months prior. Status, identical. It was biologically impossible. Marley had died in the fire. Tyler had seen him pulled from the rubble, and yet Here he was, same tail wag, same eyes, same soul. Tyler crumpled the paper and threw it across the room. "This doesn't make sense," he said aloud. "Nothing makes sense anymore." Marley, lying at the foot of his bed, gave a soft whine. And then something strange happened. He stood, walked to Tyler's closet, pawed once at the door, and sat down. Tyler opened it, confused. At the bottom, underneath a box of comics, was a shoebox. Inside were photos Tyler had never seen. They were old, worn around the edges, some curled, others stained. But they weren't of Tyler. The photos showed a different boy, older, maybe 12 or 13, standing with a golden retriever that looked exactly like Marley. They were at the same lake where Tyler had taught Marley to swim. In the background of one photo, Frank could be seen younger, rake in hand, smiling. Tyler's heart thudded. He flipped the photo. In faded ink was written, "Daniel and Max, summer '99. Max, the same face. The same scar. The dog in the photo wasn't Marley, but it was him." Tyler biked to the cemetery, the photos clutched in his hand. Frank was in his usual spot, clearing pine needles from the path. Tyler held out the pictures. Frank froze. "I thought you might find those eventually," he said quietly. "You knew this dog before me," Tyler whispered. "Didn't you?" Frank sat on the bench near Marley's grave. He rubbed the back of his neck. "His name was Max back then," he said. "Belonged to my nephew Daniel. Smartest dog I ever met." "What happened to them?" Frank's eyes grew misty. "Daniel died. Boat accident on the lake. Max was never the same. He came here every day, just like this, and sat by Daniel's grave until he vanished one winter. Thought he got lost or passed on. Never found him." He looked at Marley, who was now lying quietly at their feet. And now he's back, just under a different name. That night, the man in the gray hoodie returned, but this time, he wasn't watching. He was waiting. Frank had installed trail cams around the perimeter after the second sighting. This time, he caught a clear image. The stranger approached Marley's grave slowly, kneeling beside it. He placed something on the stone, a small carved box, and whispered something before disappearing into the woods. When Frank retrieved the box in the morning, he found a folded note inside. There was no name, just 5 words. "He remembers more than you." Inside the box was a child's toy soldier. It looked melted, as if it had survived a fire. Tyler couldn't sleep. He sat by his window, Marley curled beside him. He thought about Max, about Marley, about whatever connection bound them all. At 2:14 a.m., Marley stood up and growled. Tyler looked out the window. A shape moved at the edge of the property, tall, slow, deliberate. Then another and another, 3 figures, dogs, golden retrievers, ghostly pale in the moonlight. Marley whined, then barked once, short and sharp. The figures stopped, then vanished. Tyler ran outside, but the yard was empty, except for paw prints in the dirt. Too many for one dog. Desperate for answers, Tyler visited Pastor Helen. She welcomed him with warm tea and a patient ear. When Tyler explained everything, the photos, the box, the sightings, Helen grew quiet. "I've seen this before," she finally said. "Not the same way, but something close." She retrieved a worn book from a locked drawer. Inside were handwritten stories from townsfolk, dating back over a century. A horse that returned to the barn every morning after dying in a storm. A cat that meowed at a window for 10 years after, its owner's passing. A raven that recited a lost child's name every dusk. Helen placed a hand over Tyler's. These animals, they remember. Maybe more than we do. Tyler returned home and dug into the fire report. He scanned every line, looking for something, anything, that didn't make sense. And then he saw it. Canine remains recovered, unidentifiable due to burn severity. Assumed to be household pet based on location and size. Assumed. That's all it had been. A guess. They'd never confirmed it was Marley. Tyler's head spun. He ran to the backyard where Marley lay, basking in the sun. "You were never in that fire," he whispered. "You got out. But why didn't you come back?" Marley lifted his head, and something in his eyes said, "I tried." That night, Tyler and Frank walked the woods behind the cemetery. They followed Marley, who moved with certainty, as though retracing old steps. Half an hour in, they reached a clearing. At the center was an ancient tree, gnarled and massive. Marley stopped and stared. Buried at its base, half covered in moss, was a second headstone, smaller. Older, cracked, Frank knelt and brushed away the leaves. Max, the dog who waited. Tyler's breath caught. He's buried here?" Frank shook his head slowly. "I don't think he ever was. Maybe someone thought he should be. Or maybe this is where he came back." The wind picked up, and through the branches, they heard a sound. A bark, soft, echoing, like it was calling, home. The next morning, Tyler returned to the cemetery. He brought Marley's collar, the burned one. He knelt beside the grave and placed it gently on the stone. "I don't know what you are," he whispered, "but I know who you are, and if you need to stay here, I'll understand." Marley stared at him, tail still. Then he stepped forward, rested his head on Tyler's chest, and turned away from the grave. He walked to the gate, paused, looked back once, and wagged his tail. For the first time in weeks, he was ready to go home. The cemetery had always been quiet, but since Marley's return, something had shifted. People began visiting more often, not to see the graves, but to see him. They brought candles, toys, even handwritten notes. Some claimed it was for Daniel. Others said it was for the dog that couldn't let go. Tyler noticed it too. The growing number of strangers who left flowers, as if paying tribute to something sacred. One woman wept openly while Marley lay beside her. "I lost my son 20 years ago," she whispered. "And for a moment sitting next to him, I felt like he was here again." Word had spread, but the mystery had deepened, because the grave Marley once guarded wasn't Daniel's. It was empty. Tyler and Frank waited until sunset. They didn't tell anyone, not the town, not even Pastor Helen. With flashlights and shovels in hand, they returned to the forgotten grave under the gnarled tree. The one that read, "Max, the dog who waited." Frank hesitated. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. "No," Tyler said. "But we need to know." They began to dig. Hours passed. Roots fought back. Soil turned to stone, but 5 feet down they struck something. Wood, old, rotting, a small wooden box. Tyler's heart pounded as he brushed the dirt away. Inside was not a dog. It was a child's life. Drawings, a slingshot, a wristwatch, a melted toy soldier. A faded note lay at the bottom. It read, "For the one who loved him most. When I'm gone, stay by me." It was signed, Daniel. Tyler sat on his porch long after midnight, the box in his lap. Frank smoked silently nearby, lost in thought. "How does a dog remember a boy for decades?" Tyler finally asked. Frank didn't answer at first. Then he said, "Because some memories don't die. They live in places, smells, trees, maybe even in a heartbeat." Marley lay at their feet, eyes closed. Tyler opened the note again. "Stay by me." He thought of the grave. The fire. The dog who came back. "What if Marley isn't just remembering Daniel?" Tyler whispered. Frank looked at him. "What do you mean?" "What if Marley is remembering me?" The next morning, Tyler asked Frank to take him to the old lake house, where the photo of Daniel and Max had been taken. Frank hesitated. "It's been closed for years, since the accident." But Tyler insisted. They drove out in silence, Marley in the back seat, tail twitching every few minutes as though sensing something familiar. The house stood untouched, dust-covered, windows boarded, nature slowly taking it back. They broke the lock. Inside, time had stopped. Spiderwebs laced the corners. The furniture was covered in white sheets, but on the mantel sat a picture frame, Daniel and Max, just like in the box. Tyler picked it up. Something behind it rattled. A key. The key led to a crawl space beneath the house. Frank had forgotten it even existed. They opened the hatch. The air was cold and stale, like it hadn't breathed in years. Inside were old trunks, camping gear, and a journal. Tyler opened it. June 12th. Max followed me again today. I think he knows I'm scared. The doctor said Mom won't make it through summer. July 8th. Max got hurt chasing the boat. I told him to stay. He didn't. August 15th. I'm leaving this journal in case something happens. If anyone finds it, tell Max I'm sorry. The last entry was smudged and unfinished, but in the margins was a doodle, a boy, a dog, a grave beneath a giant tree. Tyler couldn't sleep that night. The journal haunted him, the words, the drawing, the bond. Marley paced the room, restless. He kept going to the door, pawing at it gently. Finally, Tyler opened it. Marley took off, not running, but leading. Tyler followed, flashlight in hand. They reached the cemetery. Marley didn't stop at the grave this time. He led Tyler to the caretaker's shed, to a pile of ash behind it. It was the same spot where the fire had started 3 months ago, and in the middle of the ash was a half-burned collar. Another one. Frank arrived breathless after Tyler's call. He studied the ash, the collar, the strange symbols drawn in a ring around the scorch marks. It's not natural, he said. What do you mean? This isn't where the house fire started. This is something else. The symbols looked carved, ritualistic, ancient. Who would do this? Tyler asked. Frank didn't answer, but Marley growled low in his throat. At the woods, at the darkness, at something watching. They weren't alone, and hadn't been for a long time. They brought the collar too. Pastor Helen the next day, she gasped when she saw it. These symbols, she said, tracing the charred edges. They're old, protective, but inverted. They mean the opposite. Opposite? Tyler asked. Not protection, she whispered. Binding. Frank paled. You think someone tried to trap his spirit? Helen nodded slowly. Some people believe dogs are guardians between worlds, that they can carry souls, watch over them. If someone knew that, Tyler finished her thought. They could use him, control him. Helen's voice dropped. Or bury him. That night, Tyler couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Marley sat stiffly by the door, ears perked. Then came the knock. Not a hard one, just a single deliberate tap. Tyler opened it slowly. The man in the hoodie stood there, pale, gaunt, eyes hollow. I didn't come to hurt him, the man said. Then what do you want? To set him free. Tyler's heart pounded. Who are you? The man held up a locket. Inside was a photo of Daniel and Max. I'm his brother, he whispered. I was supposed to be on that boat too. The man sat with them by the fire. He told the whole story. How Daniel had begged him to go that day. How he'd stayed behind. How guilt had eaten at him for decades. I found Max a year later, he said. Wandering, starving, half dead. But he remembered me. That's when I knew he was more than a dog. He'd tried to keep him, but Max, Marley, always returned to the grave. When the man tried to burn the collar, he'd hoped it would break. The connection. It hadn't. Now Marley stood before him once more. Waiting. The man wept. I never said goodbye. he whispered. And Marley walked over, placed his head in the man's lap, and forgave him. The man who claimed to be Daniel's brother, Evan, stayed the night at Frank's house. He didn't sleep. Tyler found him in the morning sitting on the porch steps, holding the burned collar. "Did you ever tell anyone about Daniel?" Tyler asked. "No," Evan whispered. "I thought if I stayed quiet it would hurt less." He handed Tyler an envelope. "I found this last week, in a box my mother hid in the attic. It's addressed to you." Tyler frowned and tore it open. Inside was a letter, scrawled in a child's shaky handwriting. "To my best friend Tyler, if I don't come back from the lake, don't be sad. I'll still be your friend, even if you can't see me. Max will protect you. He always does. Love, Daniel." Tyler stared at the page. The words vibrating in his chest like a long-forgotten chord finally struck. "I don't remember this," he said softly. "Maybe you weren't meant to until now," Evan replied. Frank unearthed old photo albums the next day, hoping to fill in more blanks. Among the faded images was one that stopped Tyler cold. It was his 5th birthday. He stood holding a balloon in one hand and Daniel's hand in the other. Max stood proudly in front of them, tongue out, eyes beaming. "Do you remember this day?" Frank asked. Tyler shook his head, but Marley walked over and sniffed the photo. Then he turned, walked to the front door, and barked once, as if saying, "Come see." They followed. Marley led them to the woods behind the cemetery, to a clearing. There, in the overgrown grass, was a stone ring, fire-blackened, half-buried. A child's birthday crown sat in the dirt, melted. The return to Max's grave was silent. But this time, they brought tools. Frank, Evan, and Tyler began clearing the area, removing the gnarled roots, pulling back the overgrowth. Under the soil, they found more than they expected. There were stones, carefully arranged in a circle, each one etched with a letter. Together they spelled, "Remember me." Marley laid down in the center and closed his eyes. "Is this a message?" Frank asked. Evan shook his head. "It's a promise." Tyler knelt beside Marley and ran a hand over the stones. "What happens if we remember too much?" That night, Tyler dreamed. He was back at the lake, only everything was off. The sky was blood orange. The water was frozen, despite it being summer, and Daniel stood at the edge of the dock looking at something in the water. Max barked behind him. "Don't go," Max seemed to say. But Daniel didn't hear him. Tyler reached out, trying to run forward, but his feet were stuck in the sand. Daniel turned to him, his face pale and wet with tears. "You forgot me," he whispered. Then the dock cracked open beneath him, and he vanished into the ice. Tyler woke screaming. Marley stood by his bed, whining softly. The dream haunted Tyler. So he and Evan returned to the lake house at dawn. They brought lanterns this time and explored deeper. In the cellar, behind a collapsed wall, they found something strange. A door, metal, bolted shut, carved. Into it were the same symbols from the fire pit behind the cemetery. They pried it open. Inside was a room, cold, damp, lined with shelves. But on the floor sat something chilling. A child's sleeping bag, a pillow, a stuffed animal, moldy but intact. Tyler's. Heart stopped. This was Daniel's, he whispered. Evan knelt, tears in his eyes. "He hid here," he murmured. "During the storm, alone." Tyler picked up a piece of fabric and froze. It was his old t-shirt. They returned home, shaken. Tyler's memories came in flashes now. Him and Daniel, running through the woods, laughing, crying, saying goodbye. But one image returned more clearly than all the rest. Daniel, holding Max's collar, whispering something into the dog's ear, then placing it on the ground, and walking away. Tyler remembered. Running after him, grabbing his arm. "Don't go!" "I have to," Daniel had said. And then, the sound of thunder, A scream. The water! Marley barked beside him, snapping Tyler back to the present. I was there, he said aloud. I saw. It happen. I just blocked it out. Evan nodded solemnly, and Max saw it all. Pastor Helen arrived that afternoon. They showed her the symbols again, now freshly uncovered around the grave and the lake house. She grew visibly disturbed. These are anchoring symbols, she said. They're meant to keep spirits earthbound, to prevent them from passing on. Tyler's stomach twisted. You mean Daniel's trapped? Helen nodded. And Marley's tied to him. Evan stepped forward. What if we break the circle? Can we release them both? Helen hesitated. Only if they're willing, and only if their bond is complete. What does that mean? They have to say goodbye. They spent the next 2 days preparing the ritual. Helen insisted it be done at the original grave, the one Daniel had marked with the words, "Remember me." They gathered everything they needed, the box of childhood treasures, the melted birthday crown, Daniel's note Max's original collar, and the locket Evan still wore. At the center of the circle, they placed a photo of Daniel and Max, one last token of the love that had never faded. Marley stood silently beside the grave the whole time, watching, waiting, as if he knew. That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees, the ceremony began. Helen stood in the center of the circle and spoke softly. We are gathered not to bind, but to release, to honor a love that time could not touch, and to let go. Tyler stepped forward first. I remember you now, he said. All of it. You were my best friend, and I should have never forgotten. He placed the letter into the fire. Evan stepped up next. I should have protected you. I'm sorry. But I never stopped loving you. He dropped the locket beside the flames. Finally, Marley walked forward. He sat beside the burning circle, looked up at the sky, and howled, not in pain, but in peace. A soft wind swept through the trees, the flames flickered blue, and somewhere in the distance, a boy's laughter echoed across the graveyard. The next morning, Marley did something he hadn't done in years. He chased a butterfly. Tyler watched, tears in his eyes. He's free, he whispered. Helen smiled. So is Daniel. They built a new marker beside the original grave, one that read, Daniel and Max best friends, forever, loved, remembered, released. Visitors still came to the cemetery, but not out of pity anymore. They came to honor a story, one about friendship, forgiveness, and the incredible bond between a boy and his dog. As for Marley, he never lay by the grave again because he didn't have to. Now he followed Tyler everywhere, tail wagging, eyes bright, heart full. He had carried grief long enough. It was time to carry joy. 3 weeks after the ritual, Tyler made a decision. He wrote an article titled, The Boy, the Dog, and the Promise. It recounted the full truth about Daniel, the forgotten friendship, the tragedy, and Marley's unshakable loyalty. He didn't embellish it. He didn't have to. He just told it straight, frank. Helped him publish it in the local paper. Then the regional paper picked it up. Then the state news. And soon, a national blog titled Heartstrings called and asked for permission to share the story. Tyler said yes. The very next day, their small town was flooded with strangers, reporters, tourists, grieving parents, children clutching stuffed dogs. They didn't come to gawk. They came to feel. Every day, people came to Daniel's grave to leave tokens of their own stories. A girl left a crumpled photo of her dog beside a collar wrapped in purple ribbon. Teenage boy placed a letter for his lost brother in the dirt. An old woman scattered the ashes of her beloved terrier and whispered, "Find Max for me." And through it all, Marley watched. Sometimes he'd sit quietly under the tree. Other times he'd nudge a crying visitor's hand until they smiled, but he never lay down on the grave again, as though he knew. Daniel no longer needed him there. Now others did. One rainy morning, Tyler sat in the town library, preparing to expand his article into a book. Marley lay by his feet, dozing. A woman approached the table, tall, slender, in her 50s. Her raincoat was soaked. "You're Tyler?" she asked. He looked up. "Yeah," she sat without asking. "My son died 2 years ago, hit by a drunk driver. His dog Midge was with him. She survived but hasn't barked once since." Tyler nodded, unsure what to say. "I read your story," she continued. "I read it out loud to Midge." He held his breath. "She barked when I said Marley's name." Tyler smiled. The woman left him with a hug and a letter. In it, she wrote, "You reminded us that sometimes the ones left behind carry the heaviest love." The town council reached out to Evan and Tyler 2 weeks later. They wanted to build a statue, one to honor Daniel and Max, and by extension Marley. Frank offered to donate the land beside the old willow tree. Helen blessed the project. A sculptor named Vance arrived from Portland. He spent days sitting with Marley, sketching him from every angle. He asked Evan for childhood photos of Daniel and used them as a guide. And one brisk November morning, the bronze statue was unveiled. It showed Daniel, arms around Max, both of them gazing forward, into the wind, into tomorrow. At the base, an inscription read, "Loyalty beyond life, love beyond death." Marley sniffed the base and sat beside it, just once, then trotted away. An elementary school teacher named Ms. Campbell read the story to her 3rd grade class. The next week, they took a field trip to the statue. Each child brought something: flowers, cards, dog treats, poems. One child, a quiet boy named Luke, brought only his presence. He didn't speak often, but as he stood beside the statue, he turned to Marley and whispered something into his ear. Marley tilted his head, then gently licked the boy's cheek. Ms. Campbell later confided in Tyler. Luke hadn't spoken a word since his sister passed away. After the visit, he asked if they could get a dog. "We all heal in different languages," Tyler wrote in his journal. "But sometimes, a dog understands them all." A popular podcast called The Silent Bond invited Tyler on for an interview. The host, Jamie Rivera, had once served in the military and shared his own story about a K-9 partner named Rocket. "Most people don't get it," Jamie said on air. "They think we're just projecting emotions onto animals. But when you look into their eyes, you know they carry something more." Tyler agreed. He told the full story, this time from Marley's perspective. "Everyone talks about what Daniel meant to me," he said. "But no one asks what Daniel meant to Marley. That dog waited by a grave, not out of habit, out of heart." The episode became the most downloaded in the show's history. One listener commented, "I haven't cried like that in years. Thank you for showing us what real love looks like." That winter, the town started a new tradition. Instead of the usual Christmas parade, they held a night of lights. No floats, no loud music, just people walking through the town with lanterns, each one symbolizing someone they had lost, or someone they still loved. Tyler carried one for Daniel. Evan carried one for their mother. Helen carried one for a girl named Lily, her daughter, long past, and Marley walked proudly at the front of the parade, wearing a glowing collar and guiding them all through the snowy night. No barking, no whimpering, just silence and the soft crunch of footprints lit by memory. In February, a letter arrived from Japan. It was from the caretakers of a statue in Tokyo, one honoring Hachiko, the famously loyal Akita who waited at a train station for years after his owner's death. They had read about Marley's story and wanted to create a sister monument. Tyler and Evan agreed. Months later, a small plaque was placed beside Hachiko's statue. It read, "To Max and Marley, brothers in loyalty across oceans and time. Tyler visited the site a year later and stood beside both statues. He imagined Max and Hachiko playing in fields beyond time. He smiled. So did Marley. It was spring. When Marley finally began to slow down, his joints ached. His eyes clouded. He slept more, barked less, but he never stopped following Tyler. Not once. One warm afternoon, Tyler took him to the top of Sparrow Hill, Daniel's favorite spot. They sat in the grass watching the town below. "I'm gonna miss you," Tyler said, stroking Marley's graying fur. Marley leaned against him gently, then closed his eyes. He passed quietly, without pain, without fear, as if he knew. He had finished his work, and somewhere, just maybe, Daniel was waiting with open arms. Weeks later, a box appeared on Tyler's porch. Inside was a small golden retriever pup with floppy ears and curious eyes. There was no note, no sender, only a tag on its collar that read, "Keep going." Tyler wept. Evan guessed someone from town had sent it. Maybe a fan. Maybe a friend. But Helen had another theory. "Sometimes," she said softly, "love finds its way back." Tyler named the pup Ember. And on her first visit to the statue, she ran straight to Daniel's side, sat down, and looked up, tail wagging as though she'd found her way home. The golden retriever pup Tyler named Ember had an energy so wild it felt like a spark had lit inside her bones. She chewed everything, shoes, pillows, even the corners of Evan's guitar case. She barked at the Dea vacuum. She barked at her own reflection. But at night, when Tyler would sit at his desk to write, Ember would crawl beneath his chair and sleep, curled around his feet. One night, as snow fell gently outside, she woke suddenly and sat upright, staring at the front door. Tail wagging, ears perked, as if she heard something only she could understand. Tyler listened. Nothing. But Ember knew. Tyler began noticing patterns. Ember avoided the left side of the yard, the very spot where Marley used to dig. His thinking hole. She often stared toward the tree where Daniel's statue stood, sometimes for several minutes unmoving. Evan joked, "Maybe she sees ghosts." Helen didn't laugh. She simply said, "Maybe she sees more than we do." Then one day, Ember brought something in her mouth. A small buried item she'd dug up near the willow tree. It was a rusted name tag, Max, the very one Daniel had lost as a child. Tyler's hand shook as he held it. How had she found it? Why now? He looked at Ember, who was already wagging her tail like she knew she'd done good. Tyler's dreams grew strange. He dreamed of Daniel, not as the child he remembered, but older, maybe 13 or 14. In the dream, Daniel would always be standing, at the edge of a foggy field, smiling, and beside him, Marley. Tyler could never reach them. No matter how far he ran, the field grew longer, the fog deeper, but every time he woke, Ember would be watching him, quiet, alert, and somehow that brought comfort. One morning, Tyler whispered, "Do you remember him?" Ember tilted her head, then went to the front door and barked once, like she was saying, "Let's go find him." Spring thawed the snow and the earth softened. Tyler and Evan decided to take Ember to Sparrow Hill, the same place Marley had spent his final day. As they climbed the path, Ember ran ahead, stopping only to look back and make sure they were following. At the top, she sat exactly where Marley once had. Same posture, same gaze. She didn't move until the wind blew hard enough to bend the grass. And Tyler swore he saw her ears twitch, like she heard laughter on the breeze. Daniel's laughter. They stayed there for hours, not saying much, just remembering. Ms. Campbell invited Tyler and Ember to visit the elementary school. It was show and tell day, and the children wanted to meet The puppy from the story. Ember strutted into the classroom like royalty. Luke, the boy who had been silent for a year, was the first to approach her. She licked his hand, then laid down at his feet. Luke smiled, then whispered something into her ear. He never shared what, he said. But later he asked if he could draw a picture of her. It was Ember, sitting beside Daniel and Marley, on a cloud, under a big sun, and on the back he wrote, "Love doesn't die, it just waits." The town museum opened a new wing, the Marley and Daniel Legacy exhibit. It featured Daniel's drawings, Max's collar, Marley's paw print mold, and a video screen playing interviews with Tyler and Evan. At the entrance sat a guest book. People wrote messages like, "This story saved me." "We adopted a dog because of Marley." "I believe in friendship again." Tyler brought Ember to the opening ceremony. She sat politely at the ribbon cutting, but the moment the doors opened, she bolted straight to the center of the exhibit, stopping at the glass case where Marley's collar lay. She stared for a full minute, then gently placed her paw against the glass. Everyone in the room fell silent. Even the mayor cried. That summer, the town held its first Day of Loyalty festival. There were dog adoption booths, storytelling circles, and a memorial walk that followed Marley's favorite route. Tyler was the keynote speaker. He told the story one more time, pausing often as the crowd wiped tears. Then, as he finished, Ember walked up on stage and sat beside him. She didn't bark. She didn't move, just sat tall, as if knowing her moment had come. Then a child in the crowd shouted, "That's Marley's spirit!" Laughter rippled, but no one disagreed, because in their hearts, maybe it was true. Late August, a freak thunderstorm rolled in. Lightning cracked. Winds howled, and Ember, who had never been afraid of anything, began to whimper. She ran to the back door and scratched frantically. Tyler opened it, and she bolted into the yard, straight toward the statue of Daniel and Max. She sat under the willow tree, barking into the wind. Tyler followed, shouting, "Ember, come back!" Then the lightning lit the sky, and for a moment, just a flicker, he saw a silhouette, a boy, a dog, standing hand in paw beside Ember. Then it was gone. The storm passed. The air fell still. Ember wagged her tail and trotted back like nothing had happened. Tyler didn't say a word. He didn't need to. A local artist named Grace began painting murals around town, scenes from the story. One morning, she painted a riverbank where Marley and Daniel had once played. At the bottom corner, she added a ripple in the water. Days later, Tyler walked by and noticed something. The ripple had changed. Now it resembled a paw print. He asked Grace about it. She looked confused. "I never painted that." Word spread. People began leaving flowers at the mural, and every time it rained, the paw print grew more defined. No one could explain it, but everyone believed it. Years passed. Ember grew older, slower, quieter, but she remained a constant. Tyler finished his book, The Dog Who Refused to Leave. It became a bestseller. A movie was optioned. Schools taught the story in literature classes, and one day, Tyler stood again at Daniel's grave, Ember by his side, now graying around the muzzle. "I told it right," he said softly. "I told your story the best I could." Ember looked up, then barked, once, a sound that echoed through the trees, and Tyler smiled. Because he knew some stories don't end. They just become part of the world, in every paw print, every whisper, every child who loves a dog. The first signs were subtle. Ember took longer to get out of bed. Her bounding sprints turned into gentle trots. She'd pause halfway up the stairs, looking back at Tyler as if to say, "Wait for me." The vet confirmed what Tyler already knew. Ember was aging. She was still healthy, but time had started to whisper around the edges. "She's lived a full life," the vet said kindly. Tyler nodded. but didn't respond. Because how do you explain that she was more than a dog? She was history, memory, legacy. He promised her that day. "When the time comes, I'll be with you." And Ember wagged her tail, softly. Tyler began journaling again, just like he had after Daniel's passing. But this time it wasn't for therapy, it was for remembrance. He wrote down everything Ember had done. The paw print at the museum glass, the moment she barked into the storm, the children she helped heal. He even wrote about things that made no sense. The silhouette during the thunderstorm, the paw print in the mural ripple, the rusted tag she'd unearthed from beneath snow. He wrote as though he were leaving behind a trail, a way for others to find their way back to Daniel, to Marley, to the truth buried beneath ordinary days. One night, Ember nudged the pen from his hand, then placed her paw on the journal, as if to say, "You're doing it right." Autumn came with a rush of wind and golden leaves. One afternoon, while walking Ember near the lake, Tyler saw a young girl, maybe 8 or 9, sitting alone on the bench. She looked sad, small, lost. Ember pulled toward her gently, not barking, not rushing. The girl didn't flinch when Ember laid her head in her lap. She just started to cry. Tyler sat beside her and waited. Eventually the girl whispered, "My dog died last week. His name was Rocket." Tyler placed a hand on her shoulder. "This is Ember. She knows about loss." The girl looked at the old retriever. "Will she forget her best friend?" "No," Tyler said. "She'll carry him, the way you'll carry Rocket." They sat like that until the sun dipped low. Then the girl stood and said, "I'm going to draw them together, Ember and Rocket. I think they'd be friends." Tyler nodded. "I think they already are." Weeks later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a photograph, an old Polaroid of Daniel and Marley playing in the backyard, both mid-laugh. Beneath it, a note read, "I found this in a box from my brother's things. Went to school with Daniel. I remember the way that dog looked at him, like he was the only thing in the world that mattered." Tyler framed the photo and hung it in the living room. When Ember saw it, she walked over, sat beneath it, and sighed. A long, slow, peaceful sigh. That winter, Tyler had a bench installed beneath the willow tree in the cemetery. It faced Daniel's grave. On the back of the bench, an inscription read, "For the ones who never left, even after they were gone." Ember loved that bench. She'd trot over and sit facing the headstone, quiet and still. Sometimes she'd lift her head and let out a low, contented whine, as if she were telling someone, "I'm still here." Tyler joined her often. They didn't always talk, but the silence felt full, like the space between chapters. Evan came home from college for the holidays. He'd grown into a calm, thoughtful young man. He knelt beside Ember, petting her with reverence. "She's older," he said softly. Tyler nodded, but not finished. Evan stayed for a week. They talked long into the nights about Daniel, Marley, Max, and the paths their lives had taken. On his last night home, Evan slipped a folded piece of paper into Ember's collar. "What is it?" Tyler asked. "A letter," Evan said, "for her to deliver when she sees him again." Tyler didn't ask questions. Some things weren't meant to be explained. Late one night, Ember stopped eating. She lay by the fireplace, barely lifting her head. Tyler knew. He didn't panic. He laid a blanket next to her and lay down, arm draped gently across her back. For hours, they stayed that way. At sunrise, she stood with effort and walked slowly to the front door. Tyler followed as she stepped onto the porch. She looked out toward Sparrow Hill, then at him, then sat. The wind blew gently, lifting the tips of her fur, and Tyler swore he heard it again. Daniel's laugh. Tyler carried Ember to the car, drove to the hill. Together they sat under the tree. He read aloud from his journal. told her stories about the boy who had once built, cities from cardboard and the dog who guarded them, about the best friend who never stopped waiting, about the ripple that never faded, and then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ember rested her head on his lap, took one deep breath, and exhaled. For the last time. Tyler wept quietly, not with devastation, but with the deep ache that comes from losing something truly, impossibly good. A week later, the town gathered for a memorial service beneath the willow. They buried Ember beside Marley. Children left drawings and toys. Adults read poems and passages from Tyler's book. The mayor announced the renaming of the town's main trail to the Ember Path. Ms. Campbell's class planted a new tree near the grave, a golden maple. They called it the legacy tree. Tyler placed a plaque in front of it. Ember, the dog who remembered, the friend who remained. A soft breeze stirred the branches, and one of the children gasped. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" another whispered. It sounded like two dogs barking, together. Months later, Tyler returned to the bench under the willow, carrying his journal. He opened to the final page, a letter he had written, but never read aloud. He began, "To whoever finds this, if you're sitting here, I hope you're not alone. I hope you're remembering someone who made your world brighter. Someone who never gave up on you, someone who waited, even when you didn't know they were waiting." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. Then continued, "Dogs don't just guard homes, they guard souls. Ember guarded mine, and Marley guarded Daniel's. If you're reading this, you're part of their story now. Make it a good one." He closed the book, looked out across the town, and smiled, because he knew. Some love is so strong, even death can't break it, and some friendships last forever. After Ember's passing, Tyler struggled with silence. No gentle tapping of nails on the floor. No soft sighs at his feet during dinner. But something shifted inside him. Not sadness. Not entirely. It was purpose. The town's newly renamed Ember Path had become more than a trail. It was a refuge. Tyler began volunteering with a local support group for grieving children. He would bring them to the legacy tree, sit on the bench with them, and tell them Ember's story, not in grand, poetic terms, just as it happened, the waiting, the loyalty, the goodbye, and every time, the kids leaned in closer. One girl whispered, if she could be brave. Maybe I can too. At one of those sessions, a boy named Micah arrived. He hadn't spoken a word since his sister died in a car accident. 7 months of silence. He'd carry a notebook to write in instead. On his third visit to the legacy tree, Tyler handed him a small photograph of Ember sitting beneath the tree. Micah stared at it for a long while. Then, in the smallest whisper, "She looks like she understands." Tyler froze, then simply nodded. She did. That day marked the beginning of Micah's return, and a new understanding for Tyler. Stories heal, especially when wrapped in fur and love. Months later, the museum curator invited Tyler to view something special. They had dedicated a new exhibit, called Guardians of the Heart, featuring local stories of animal loyalty. At the center was a life-sized oil painting, Ember, sitting beside Marley's grave beneath the willow tree. Behind her, a faint shimmer of a silhouette. Daniel. The artist had painted it from memory and story, never once having met them. Tyler stood before it for a long time, hands in his pockets, heart thudding softly. "She's more than a dog now," the curator whispered. Tyler nodded. She always was. Daniel's story, once tucked away in journals and graveyard whispers, now filled classrooms. Local schools began teaching a short elective titled Lessons from Ember and Daniel. It wasn't just about grief, it was about friendship, loyalty, courage. Teachers would read passages from Tyler's journals aloud, and when they reached the part about Ember staying at Daniel's grave, the room always went silent. Even the rowdiest students leaned forward, because it wasn't fiction. It was something real, something raw, a reminder that love, when pure, doesn't need embellishment to be unforgettable. A new housing development began, construction just north of the cemetery. The town voted to name the main road Ember Lane. By spring, young families had moved in and the area blossomed with laughter and the patter of little feet. One day, a little girl asked her father, "Why's our road called Ember Lane?" He smiled and replied, "It's named after a dog who never stopped loving her best friend." That night, the girl drew a picture of a golden dog with wings curled beside a boy's gravestone. She placed it in their window. Soon, the whole neighborhood had drawings in their windows, each one with the words, "She remembered." Tyler had long resisted the idea of publishing a second book. The first, The Boy and the Dog Who Waited, had been quiet and honest. But now, with the letters he'd received and the lives he'd seen touched, he felt something forming again, not just about Ember or Daniel, but about what came after, about Micah, about the kids, about the trails and benches and whispers of hope. He titled it, The Ripple, How One Dog's Wait Changed a Town. Publishers leapt at it, but Tyler didn't want money. He wanted schools funded, dog shelters supported, and grief counselors hired, all in Ember's name. The cemetery's groundskeeper approached Tyler one morning with an idea. "I'd like to install a statue beside the grave, a permanent guardian." Tyler approved the design without needing to see sketches. A few weeks later, the sculpture was unveiled. Marble carved with exquisite detail, a golden retriever curled at the foot of a headstone, eyes half closed, ears alert, forever watching, forever waiting. Tourists visited it. Children left stuffed animals. Vets, who had served and lost, came to sit beside it and cry. Some said they felt peace radiate from it. Others swore they heard a soft bark in the wind. Outside the cemetery gate, the town installed a small weatherproof letterbox. Above it, for Ember, for Marley, for the ones we miss. People began leaving letters, short notes, long stories, drawings, tokens. One was addressed to my brother, who loved dogs more than people. Another, to the dog who stayed behind. I would have done the same for my friend, and one day Tyler found an envelope with no name. Inside, "Because she stayed, I stayed. Because she waited, I walked back into my house instead of leaving it forever. Thank you. Thank you for not leaving." Tyler added that one to his journal. One spring day, a young girl stood at the sculpture of Ember holding a tiny puppy. She looked unsure, on the edge of tears. Tyler, who was visiting the grave, asked gently, "What's her name?" The girl looked up, eyes wide. "I don't know yet. She's scared." Tyler smiled. So was Ember once. The puppy squirmed and nestled into the girl's arms. "She doesn't bark much," the girl whispered. "Maybe she's listening," Tyler said. The girl walked to the sculpture and whispered something in the puppy's ear, then turned and said, "Her name is Emberly." Tyler felt a sudden warmth on the breeze, like sunlight through trees. Years passed. Ember's bench weathered, but stood strong. The legacy tree grew tall, branches stretching like arms across the sky. Then one day the storm returned. Gray skies, distant thunder, just like that first night. Tyler was older now, slower. He walked to the graveyard with his cane, breath steady, sat on the bench, waited. And as lightning cracked the sky, a gentle figure padded toward him, a golden dog, no collar, no leash. She sat beside him and placed her head in his lap. Not a ghost, not a vision, just a reminder. The ripple never ends. Emberly was unlike any dog Tyler had ever met. She was a golden retriever puppy with curious eyes and an untamed spirit. Adopted. By the young girl who had once stood by Ember's statue, Emberly seemed to carry a spark. Tyler watched as Emberly ran the length of Ember Path, chasing leaves, barking joyfully. She was a living tribute. A new chapter. Emberly's presence brought light back to the town. People smiled more. Children laughed, louder. Even the air seemed lighter. From the moment Emberly arrived, strange things happened. Tyler often felt her looking toward the willow tree, eyes fixed on the marble statue as if sensing something beyond the physical. One evening, as dusk settled, Emberly stood silently beside the statue. Her fur shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Tyler heard a soft bark. No, not a bark, more like a whisper carried on the wind. He realized then that Emberly was connected, not just to the past, but to the legacy of love and loyalty that Ember and Marley had created. At the annual town festival, children gathered around Emberly and the statue. They made a promise, a vow to honor Ember's memory by caring for animals, helping those in need, and always standing by their friends. One child holding a small wooden heart said aloud, "We promise to be like Ember, to wait, to love, to never give up." The crowd cheered, and Tyler knew that the story wasn't just his or Ember's anymore. It belonged to everyone. Years later, a fierce storm rolled into town. Thunder cracked, lightning illuminated the sky. Tyler, older now, took shelter beneath the willow tree. Beside him, Emberly stayed calm, her eyes reflecting the storm's fury. As the rain poured, Tyler felt warmth on his hand. He looked down. Emberly was there. No fear, only trust. In that moment, Tyler understood. The waiting, the love, the loyalty. They were eternal. Emberly grew strong. She became the town's new guardian. She led lost hikers back to safety, comforted children who were afraid, and stayed close to the graves of Marley and Ember. People began to visit the cemetery, not with sadness, but with hope. Emberly's gentle presence reminded them that even in loss, there is life. Even in endings, beginnings. One peaceful evening, Tyler sat on the bench beneath the willow. Emberly rested her head in his lap. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you, old friend, for everything." Tyler's breath was calm, steady. He smiled, because he knew the story would live on, not just in pages or statues, but in hearts, forever waiting. Years turned into decades. The town flourished. Ember Path became a symbol of hope worldwide. Visitors came from far and wide to see the statue, walk the trail, and hear the story of a dog who refused to leave her best friend's grave. In shelters, volunteers told the tale to inspire kindness. In schools, children learned the power of loyalty, and somewhere in the breeze, the softest bark echoed. A reminder that some friendships never fade. When Tyler passed peacefully in his sleep, the town mourned deeply. But his wish was simple. He wanted to be buried beside Daniel, Marley, and Ember, on a gentle hill beneath the willow tree. There, the four friends would rest together, united forever. The community gathered for a final ceremony. Emberly lay quietly at the foot of the grave. A golden light seemed to shine from the tree above. Though Tyler was gone, his journals, letters, and stories inspired new generations. The legacy tree stood tall, a symbol of enduring friendship. Emberly's descendants roamed the town, each carrying the spirit of loyalty and love. Children who once grieved found joy. Families found comfort, and somewhere, just beyond sight, the bond between a boy and his dog stretched beyond time. The wind carries the whispers of stories, of dogs who waited, of friends who never left, of love that outlasts life itself. As long as the willow sways, as long as hearts remember, the story will never end, because some friends are forever waiting. Thank you for joining us on this journey of love, loss, and loyalty. Remember, friendship transcends even the deepest goodbyes, and sometimes all it takes is one heart that refuses to leave, to change everything.